In the book Political Prisoner, convicted felon Paul Manafort, who was found guilty of defrauding banks and the government, he maintains that within the facility in which he was wrongly imprisoned, he wore a white polo shirt and sneakers and considered himself the best-dressed inmate in Northern Neck. In I Want to Tell You by O.J. Simpson, the accused murderer trashes the parents of a kid who wrote him during his murder trial. Dear O.J., the kid writes, "Hi, I am 12 years old and I am a fan of yours. I don't think you killed Nicole or Ronald. Even if you did, I would still be your fan, and so would my mom, because everyone makes mistakes." To which OJ replied, "It disturbs me that a kid would write about any kind of killing, and that the parents need to step in. Those are your fans, Juice." And here's something from The Treasury of Clean Jokes by Tal D. Bonham, pictured here with his famous look-alike. Crime in New York City has gone way down now that they've stationed a policeman in each subway station. So far, not one train has been stolen. No offense to these authors, but these aren't great books. If anything, they're mostly just props for an out-of-focus shelf. But I'm allowed to access books like these because they're just collections of ideas, thoughts, or opinions intended to shape your mind. Even if they're just questionable zingers like, "Every man needs a wife because too many things go wrong that cannot be blamed on the government." Tal D. Bonham. But in recent years, bookshelves across the country have been scrutinized down to the typesetting, as advocacy groups have pressured public facilities to restrict access to certain titles. There's also guys like this state senator out of Missouri who's running for governor, who just burned these cardboard boxes to make it look like he was burning books to make some sort of political point.
When I'm the governor of this state, I'm going to go in there and start breaking down the bureaucracies in Jefferson City that are enabling this type of obscene, vulgar material from getting into the hands of children in the first place.
In late September, a new report by the nonprofit literature and human rights group PEN America found that during the 2022-2023 school year, the USA had 3,362 instances of banned books at public schools, a 33% year-over-year increase since the 2021-2022 school year.
In its simplest form, when we say a book ban, we mean a book that was previously accessible to students in a public school setting, and that book is no longer accessible, or access to that book has been restricted.
That's the director of the Freedom to Read project at PEN America, and they're not the only ones keeping track of titles that are being permanently checked out. October 1 through October 7 marks the American Library Association's Banned Books Week, and that association also appears to be great at following which books are becoming unavailable, which makes sense because these are the types of people who use databases in the Dewey Decimal System and card catalogs to find out exactly what happened to that late copy of Lee Iacocca's autobiography. It's right here. And by the way, a lot of libraries have gotten rid of late fees entirely. 2 years ago here in New York City, the New York Public Library wiped them all out indefinitely and said they'll no longer accrue late fees going forward. However, if your book is overdue by a month, you'll get charged a replacement fee, which you can then get refunded if you bring it back within 90 days of its due date. So it's not a late fee, but they'll technically charge you a fee if it's late, but you can still return it. Whatever. I'm keeping this. Anyway, the ALA keeps track of all sorts of info on book bans and book challenges. And yes, those are two different things. A book challenge, where you challenge a book, which would be quite the intellectual cage fight, is the attempt to remove or restrict access to a particular material based on the objections of a person or group. A book ban itself is the actual removal of those materials. Now, as the Library Association points out, book challenges can often be made with good intentions, like to protect others like children from difficult ideas and information. But they also go on to point out that whether censorship is subtle or overt, either form of censorship can be harmful. Here's the co-founder of Moms for Liberty, a conservative group that's been named an extremist organization by the Southern Poverty Law Center that claims parents have a right to disagree with books being made available in public schools if they think they're not appropriate.
Parents have the fundamental right to direct the education, the upbringing of their children. That's their education, as I said, their medical care, their morality, their religion.
Now, the Library Association actually appears to agree with that. Interpreting their own Library Bill of Rights in regards to kids, they say that libraries and their governing bodies cannot assume the role of parents or the functions of parental authority in the private relationship between parent and child. It's just that when it comes to removing or restricting access to books, they maintain that parents and guardians who do not want their children to have access to specific library services, materials, or facilities should advise their own children and not take books away from everyone. That PEN America study from earlier found that during the 2022-2023 school year, 48% of books banned dealt with physical abuse or violence, 30% included characters of color and themes of race or racism, 30% represented LGBTQ+ identities, and 6% included a trans character.
This year, we have a slightly different list of titles where in this school year alone, we saw lots of instances of Looking for Alaska by John Green being banned. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is a book that continues to get banned and was banned quite a bit, as well as The Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So there was a little bit of a shift from the most frequently banned books from last year to this year, but there are genderqueer we do see show up from year to year as one of the most frequently banned books.
Genderqueer, a graphic novel about the author's experience with gender identity, is one of the most frequently banned books over the last few years. It's intended for high school students and adults and features some explicit illustrations of sex. As the author once told the Texas Tribune, "I can absolutely understand the desire of a parent to protect their children from sensitive material, but there are queer youth at every high school, and those students, that's who I'm thinking about, is the queer student who is getting left behind." That Mom for Liberty takes issue with books like these.
There are a lot of books that are being introduced in schools that parents have found that are concerning, that cover a lot of very explicit, graphic, sexual content. Why are they fighting so hard to keep these pornographic books in school? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
PEN America says that concerns over porn in schools can be hyperbolic and misleading. And this is what's driving the removal of thousands of books that cover topics and themes intentionally written for young, diverse audiences. But that Mom for Liberty says people focusing on their push for book bans are focusing too much on their push for book bans.
Not really seeing the correlation between those books needing to be in a library and our kids learning to read. And so we're going to come back to the fact that kids deserve to learn to read, and we should all be focusing on helping schools to do that.
Now, when it comes to getting kids to read, that's a fair point. When I was young, the only thing I ever bothered leafing through were Mad magazines, which taught me how to master the art of the obscure reference thanks to reprints of cartoons about 1960s sports cars. But as the CEO here of the nonprofit reading and education group First Book points out, young children today, especially ones in communities of color, are struggling to keep up with the text.
When you look at Black, Latino, Native kids who are in the 4th grade in the United States right now, you find that just over 80% of them are not proficient in reading. 80%. And so when we look at strategies that engage kids in reading, that elevate their reading scores, their aptitude, we have to use every tool we have.
That's why their nonprofit just carried out a 6-month study across 450 different classrooms to measure what happened when diverse books were introduced into children's classrooms.
Number one is kids read more. The books are interesting, they're captivating. The second important finding was that their reading scores jumped up by 3 points over what the expected increase would be.
Again, as that Mom for Liberty claims, she just wants kids to learn to read, though of course not the stuff she doesn't want them to read.
Listen, if you can't read the book, then forget about identifying with anybody, and that's where we are right now. Again, it's just a disingenuous conversation. I understand the need to be able to read stories about yourself, and I think that good parents and community members and in libraries, we should be working to really engage kids and learn and help them to learn to love to read. But first, they have to learn to read.
But according to that First Book CEO, introducing diverse books to students, through which kids can see themselves and relate more, is having an incredibly positive effect.
In those classrooms that selected bilingual and LGBTQ books for their library collections, they showed even stronger results on the reading. And this validates the use of diverse books that celebrate the full diversity of kids and their families and our country. We need that desperately.
Taking a bit of a left turn here, one book I couldn't seem to find on any banned list was this collection of old tweets by legendary Twitter poster Dril. Here's one from the chapter called Sex. I got off at historic colonial Williamsburg. Now, this may not be a collection of filth bound for any library in this nation, save for maybe the Library of Congress. But in honor of Banned Books Week, the American Library Association has been laying out exactly who's challenging what where. They say last year, a little more than half of the demands to censor materials took place at schools or school libraries, while a little less than half targeted public libraries. Most of these challenges were brought forth by political or religious groups, and 90% of these challenge attempts targeted multiple titles, thanks to the works of well-organized movements that distribute book lists. Indeed, that Moms for Liberty group puts out 100-something page PDFs like these, incorporating another group's little book rating system, QR codes to find book summaries, and descriptions of what's in the Handmaid's Tale graphic novel for those who don't have Hulu. But here's the thing, entire communities aren't necessarily the ones responsible for getting books banned. As recently laid out by the Washington Post, 60% of book challenges across the country come from just 11 people. 11 people, less than a dozen. Imagine Danny Ocean and his crew went through all that trouble in Las Vegas just to rough up a Barnes & Noble. And just one of those serial book banishers, a 48-year-old Virginia mom, says she challenges one book every week and vows to never stop. Critics say it's not right that the objections of just 11 people, let alone one who just has a lot of time on her hands, can control the texts that schools and communities are able to offer their students and residents. And while some states like Virginia have new laws on the books that make it easier than ever to request the ban of a book, other states like Illinois have moved to outlaw book bans entirely. And if you happen to find yourself in a state with a new book ban, the bannedbookclub.info has you covered. They'll provide anyone in a library that's banned a book access to a digital version of that same title for free. Because, yeah, you know everything's on the internet, right?